This is William Michael of the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, and in this talk, we're going to walk through our first hour of study in freshman Latin. Selective colleges and universities recommend that students study one language for 4 years in high school. And so it's good for us to plan to make use of all 4 years to study a single foreign language. Colleges would rather that a student gain fluency in one language than that they learn a little bit about a number of different languages, because a little bit of knowledge about many different subjects really isn't useful or helpful in future studies. So in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy's high school program, we're going to focus on one language for foreign language, and that language is going to be Latin. Now, you may have already started studying Latin in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, and if you have, that's great, because the same content from our online Latin courses is going to be studied in our high school Latin courses. So if you've already been studying Latin in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, you're going to have an advantage. But I recommend that you still study carefully so that you can get the highest scores possible. Don't just assume that because a topic is being reviewed that all of the content of the lesson will be the same. I'll be providing hour-long lectures for every lesson, and you need to make sure that you listen to all of these lectures from beginning to end. If you haven't studied Latin before, that's perfectly okay, because I'm going to start from the beginning and cover everything for students who have never studied Latin before. What we're going to do in this course is study Latin grammar, Latin reading, and Latin vocabulary. What we'll do is take 1 hour to study a new grammar lesson. The next hour, we'll study a Latin reading lesson. And we'll go back and forth like that through the course, and every few hours, we'll take a break from that, and we'll study a topical vocabulary lesson and learn a bunch of new Latin vocabulary. So grammar, reading, and vocabulary will be the topics of our hours of instructional time in Latin studies in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy high school program. So remember, grammar, reading, and vocabulary. And we'll repeat that cycle probably for all 4 years of our Latin studies. We'll simply start with simple Latin grammar and easy Latin reading, and we'll work up to more advanced Latin grammar and just get into more complicated reading over the years. Latin, as you may know, is not a living language in the sense that people continue to speak it and use it in business or in education or politics, even in the church. It's really a literary language. It's a language that's used to study history, to study ancient documents and ancient literature. It's helpful for scholarly work and studies. It's helpful for translation work, reading books that were originally written in Latin. But we don't study Latin to speak it or to read new things in Latin. We're usually reading documents that we're already familiar with, but simply want to look at the Latin text to clarify some issues. So we're not going to spend time speaking Latin, although we could. We're going to focus on learning the grammar of the Latin language, which is one of the classical liberal arts. We're going to learn how to read and translate the Latin language, and we're going to develop a broad Latin vocabulary. These will be the things that will prove most helpful for you in your studies and in your life in general. So That's a good overview of what we're going to be doing in high school Latin. And in this freshman course, we're going to study the first part of Latin grammar, or the first two parts, actually. The first part of Latin grammar is called orthography, and that's the study of the letters of the Latin alphabet and the sounds or pronunciation of Latin letters and syllables and words. So we'll take some time to learn the letters and how to pronounce Latin correctly. That's orthography. And then we'll spend most of our freshman year working on Latin etymology. Etymology is the second part of grammar. In etymology, we'll study the actual forms of Latin words and make sure we understand how Latin words work, how their different forms change in meaning, and we'll pay attention to those lessons that we learn in grammar as we do our Latin reading each week. So let's go ahead and get started with our first lesson in freshman Latin. What I'd like to do in this first hour is walk through the Latin alphabet and talk about the Latin letters, the sounds of the letters, and how Latin is pronounced. You can follow along looking at the printed lesson. If you'd like to listen to this talk, there's no need to stare at the video or look at the screen while you listen to this lecture. I recommend you get the printed lesson in front of you on your computer or on your desk, and you simply follow along as I walk through the printed lesson in our hourly lectures. So let's get started with our first lesson, Latin Grammar 1, Lesson 1, on the letters of the Latin language. The very first rule in Latin grammar is that in Latin there are 23 letters. In Latin there are 23 letters. In English we have 26 letters. In ancient Greek there are 24 letters. In Latin there are 23 letters. Make sure you remember that there are fewer letters in Latin than in English. The letters look the same, but they have different names. And again, there aren't as many letters in Latin as in English. So one thing you should think about, one challenge that I'll give you, is to study the Latin alphabet and make note of which letters are in the English alphabet that are not in the Latin alphabet. That will be one of your questions on the assessment for this lesson. Which letters are in the English alphabet that are not in the Latin alphabet? There are 26 letters in the English alphabet, but only 23 in the Latin alphabet. Now, as for the names of the Latin letters, they're very different. And so we need to learn the Latin alphabet, and you need to chant or recite the Latin alphabet until you have it memorized. This needs to be memorized. I'm going to read through it a few times to help you hear the sounds and make sure you hear the names of each letter. And then I'm going to ask that you spend some time memorizing the Latin alphabet in your own private study time. So let's recite the Latin alphabet together. I'm going to use classical pronunciation, and I'll talk about that a little more in a bit. But I'm going to read the names of the Latin letters using classical pronunciation. A, B, K, D, E, F, G, H, I, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T, U, X, Y, and zeta. These are the 23 letters, or the names of the 23 letters used in Latin. And again, I spoke the names of the letters using classical pronunciation. Let's recite those letter names one more time, just so you have a chance to hear them again. And again, we're using classical pronunciation. A, B, K, D, E, F, G, H, I, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T, U, X, Y, and Zeta. These are the 23 letters of the Latin alphabet. Now, you'll notice as I recited those names that many of the names of the letters are the same as the names of the English letters. The most important difference is the sound of the vowels. The sound of the vowels is what makes up the main difference between the pronunciation of Latin and English. What's important to know about Latin pronunciation, about classical Latin pronunciation, is that every letter represents only one sound. In classical Latin, every letter represents only one sound. This makes speaking and reading and spelling in classical Latin very, very easy. In English, spelling and reading can be very difficult because in English, even though we have 26 letters, the letters can represent a number of different sounds. We can have the same letters or the same groups of letters in words and have completely different pronunciation in English. And this is what makes reading English very difficult. It takes years and years of experience to become familiar with all of the different pronunciations that are needed to read and spell English correctly. But in classical Latin, that's not true. In classical Latin, every letter represents one sound. It can't get any easier than that. And so in classical Latin, once we learn a letter and its sound, there's nothing else to learn. Anytime we hear that sound, we can write that letter. And anytime we see that letter, we can read it with that sound. Phonics in classical Latin is very simple because every letter represents only one sound. I'm going to repeat that one more time. Phonics in classical Latin is very simple because every letter represents only one sound. Now, when we look at the 23 Latin letters, there are 23 letters, but they divide into two classes, two different groups. The letters are divided into vowels and consonants. The letters are divided into vowels and consonants. So even though there are 23 letters, there are only two different groups of letters, vowels and consonants. Of the 23 Latin letters, 6 of them are vowels. There are 6 vowels in Latin. The vowels, the names of the vowels are a, e, I, o, u, and upsilon. Let me repeat those. A, e, I, and upsilon. So there are 6 vowels in the Latin language, and it's important to take time and study them because they are not named or pronounced like English vowels. In English, the names of the vowels are A, E, I, O, and U. There are 5 vowels in English: A, E, I, O, and U. But these 5 vowels in English can be read with many different sounds. The vowel A, for example, can be pronounced with the long A sound, like A. It can also be pronounced with the short sound, like A. It can be pronounced with a rounded sound, like aw. It can be pronounced with a schwa sound, like in the word above. So you can see there are a number of different pronunciations, a number of different sounds represented by English vowels. This isn't true in Latin. Once we learn the name of the vowel, we also know its sound because the name of the vowel and its sound are the same. Anytime you see the vowel in classical Latin writing, you can read it with that one sound, with the name of the vowel. So let's repeat the names of those 6 Latin vowels. The first vowel is ah, which looks like the English letter A. The name of the vowel, though, is in Latin, and anytime we see that vowel in classical Latin, we read it with the sound ah. The second Latin vowel is named e. It looks like the English letter E, but its name in Latin is e, and any time we see the vowel e, we read it in Latin with the sound e. The third Latin vowel is E. It looks like the English letter I, but the name in Latin is E, and anytime we see it in classical Latin writing, we read it with the sound E. The fourth Latin vowel is O. This is the easiest one because it looks just like the English letter O and is pronounced like the English long O. The fifth Latin vowel is U. It has the same form as the English letter U, but its name in Latin is U. And anytime we see it in classical Latin writing, we read it with the sound U. The last Latin vowel is a little tricky. It's not like the other vowels. It has a weird name. The name of the 6th and final Latin vowel is upsilon. And you may wonder, where in the world does that come from? We have the simple names, A, E, O, U. And then we come to this last vowel and we have this weird name, upsilon. Where does that come from? Well, this is a special vowel in Latin. It actually isn't a Latin vowel. It's actually a Greek vowel. But Greek words were brought into the Latin language, and in Greek words where the vowel upsilon, which is a Greek letter, in Greek words where the vowel upsilon was used, that vowel was kept in the Latin language. So upsilon is a vowel that's found in Latin writing, but it's actually a Greek vowel, and it's read with the sound that it was read with in Greek. It's a very strange verb. Now, in order to make the sound of the upsilon, you have to work with your mouth a little bit. The first thing I want you to do is pretend that you're going to make the sound E, E, E. Inside of your mouth, with your tongue and the inside parts of your mouth, you're going to speak as if you're making the sound E, E, E. But you're going to round your lips on the outside of your mouth. Round your lips as if you were going to say ooh. And put those two sounds together. Make the sound E inside your mouth, but round your lips at the front. When you do it correctly, it sounds like this. Ooh, ooh, ooh. It's a strange sound. We don't have this vowel sound in English, so it's especially difficult sometimes for English students to learn. But if you practice it, you'll be able to figure it out. Now, when you see this vowel, upsilon, in Latin, it's okay for you to read it with the sound of the vowel oo, or to read it with the English vowel sound of the Y, like E, as if we were thinking about the word berry. If you think of the Y at the end of the word berry, and you see the letter Y making the vowel sound E, it's okay to read the upsilon in Latin words with either the sound of the oo or that vowel sound of the English Y, as in berry, E. So there are 6 Latin vowels. And remember, the upsilon is only in words that are borrowed from Greek, so it's not very common. What you need to know is that there are 6 vowels in Latin, 6 vowels, a, e, o, u, and upsilon. And that upsilon is only used in words that are borrowed from Greek. That's the first class of letters in the Latin alphabet. We said there are 23 letters, but those letters can be divided into 2 different classes. The first class of letters are vowels, and there are 6 vowels. So if there are 23 letters, and 6 of them are vowels, how many of them belong to the other class? The answer is 17. The second class of letters is called consonants. Consonants. So the 2 classes of letters are vowels and consonants. There are 6 vowels and there are 17 consonants. Now let's just look at the names of these 2 classes so we understand clearly what they are. The English word vowel comes from the Latin word vocalis, and vocalis comes from a word vox, which means the voice. Think of your vocal cords. Maybe you've heard of the phrase vocal cords. Vocal. Vocal has to do with the voice. Vowels are letters that are made with the voice. You don't need to use any of the other parts of your mouth. You can simply make the sound with your voice, and by changing the shape of your lips and your mouth and making the sound sometimes near the back of your mouth, sometimes near the front of your mouth, you can change the sound of those letters that are called vowels. But they're sounds that are made with the voice alone. And we can make the sounds of the vowels by themselves. We can say a, e, o, u, and ü. We can make the sounds of the vowels by themselves. Their sounds are made with the voice alone. That's what it means to be a vowel. The other class of letters in the Latin alphabet are called consonants. And that word consonant means sounding together with or making a sound with. And the reason why these letters are called consonants is because their sounds cannot be made by themselves, but they must be joined to a vowel in order to make their sound. Consonants must be sounded with a vowel. That's what the word consonant means. An easy way to see what this means is if you look at the printed lesson, if you simply look at the names of the letters as they're spelled, you'll notice that for the vowels, there's just the single vowel letter, because that letter can be spoken by itself. But you'll see that the names of the consonants require that we add a vowel so that we can say the consonant's name. That's what it means to be a consonant. The consonants are letters that cannot be sounded by themselves. And so there are 17 consonants in Latin. Let's go through the alphabet and just quickly discuss the sounds of the Latin consonants. And again, we're talking about classical Latin. There's another form of Latin that's called Ecclesiastical Latin or medieval Latin. We could even say Christian Latin. Ecclesiastical Latin, that second kind of Latin, is more complicated and takes a little more practice. When we get started with Latin reading, we'll spend some time practicing Ecclesiastical Latin. But to get you started in grammar, I want to focus on classical Latin because it's simpler and it will help you to get started more easily. Let's look at the names of the Latin consonants and make sure we understand how to pronounce the sound that's represented by each of these letters. The first consonant in Latin is be, be. It looks just like an English B, and it makes the same sound as the English B. B, b. That's the letter be in Latin. The second consonant is the letter K, K, written like the English letter C, but pronounced with the hard C sound like in the English word cat, cat, k, k. In classical Latin, the letter K always makes the sound k, k. The next consonant is de, and it's just like the English letter D, 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 de. The next consonant is the Latin letter F, F, and it's just like the English letter F, pronounced with the sound f, f. The next consonant is ge, ge, like the hard English G in gun, g, g. That's the letter ge in Latin. Next, we have the consonant ha, ha. Like the English letter H, it makes the sound ha, 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 just a breath. Ha. That's ha. The next consonant is kappa, kappa. It looks like the English letter K, and it always makes the sound k, k. Now you might ask, why do we have two letters in Latin that make the same sound? We said the letter K makes the sound k, and now we're saying that the letter kappa makes the sound k. Well, the reason why is just like upsilon, kappa is borrowed from Greek. In Greek, the letter looks like an English K and is named kappa. And so when we bring Greek words into Latin, if they have that letter kappa in them, that letter was kept. And so we see a different consonant, even though it makes the same sound. But this is called kappa. It looks like the English letter K. The next consonant is L. L, exactly like the English letter L. Makes the sound L. L. Then we have M. M, just like the English M. Makes the sound M. M. We then have N, just like English. N. N. The next consonant after the vowel O is P. P. Just like the English letter P, it makes the sound P. 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 We then have the consonant Q. Q. Looks just like the English letter Q, makes the sound K. K, but is usually followed by the vowel U. So normally we have Qua. Qua. We then see the consonant R. R. And you can hear that I make the sound that's called a trill. R. R. That's the sound of the classical Latin R. R. Now that trill sound for some students is difficult. You may not be able to make it at all. It's not used in English. But it's common in classical languages and in other languages like Spanish. You'll have to practice a bit to make that trill sound. Some students just can't get it. If you can't get it, it's okay, because remember, Latin is not a spoken language. If you can't make that trill sound, just read it with the English R sound, R, R. That's okay. For example, if you see the name Roma, Roma, and you say Roma, there's no problem with that. That's fine. But understand that the classical pronunciation uses the trill sound, R, R. The next consonant is S, S, just like the English letter S, the sound S, S. We then have Te, Te, just like the English T, makes the sound T, T. After the vowel U, we have the consonant X, X. This is like the English letter X in the word box, box. The letter X is called a double consonant, because it makes the sound of two different consonants. The letter X makes the sound of the letter K, 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 and the letter S, S, S. We put those two sounds together and make the double consonant sound X, X, X. The last letter, the last consonant, I should say, in the Latin alphabet is zeta, zeta. And this is just like the English letter Z. It makes the sound Z, Z. So those are the 17 Latin consonants. And we've now studied the names and sounds of all 23 Latin letters. If you wanted to learn to read and spell classical Latin, that would be all you need to know. Now you simply have to put the letters together. And if you're reading, just practice reading one letter at a time and make the one sound that that letter represents. So once you learn the names of the Latin letters and their sounds, you can read and spell any Latin word. It's really very, very simple. The only time that there would be some confusion might be if you have to choose between the letter K and kappa. That might be confusing, but as I said, kappa is used only when we borrow Greek words. So eventually you would learn the difference. But if you know the names and sounds of the 23 Latin letters, which we've just gone over, you should be able to read and write any Latin word. It's that simple. So that's all for the vowels and consonants of the Latin alphabet. Pretty simple. Now, to go on with this lesson, we go on in the printed lesson to study syllables. We ask, what is a syllable? Letters are the individual parts of syllables, and syllables are the parts of words. What is a syllable? A syllable is an action of speech. A syllable is an action of speech. Some call it an impulse of speech that's made up of the sounds of one or more letters. So a syllable is a combination of letters, a combination of sounds that does not necessarily make a word. A syllable is made of letters. It can be made of only one letter or more than one letter. And there are plenty of examples in the lesson. Just to remember that letters are used to make syllables. And then in the last, or rule number 8 in the printed lesson, we see that a word is made of syllables. A word is made up of syllables. Sometimes a word can be made of only one syllable. Sometimes a word is made of more than one syllable. But words are made of syllables, and syllables are made of letters. And then lastly, the 9th rule in the lesson says that speech, or a sentence, is made out of words. A sentence is made out of words. In grammar, the whole point of studying grammar is to learn how to speak and read and write properly. And so at the end of lesson 1, we learn that speech, or a sentence, is made up of words. So in order to speak well, in order to read rightly, we have to know how to use words. But words are made up out of syllables. And so in order to understand how to use words rightly, to speak words rightly, we need to understand syllables. And because syllables are made up of letters, in order to understand syllables, we have to understand letters, because letters are the elements of language. Letters are the basic building blocks of all language. We begin by studying letters. We then put letters together to form syllables. We then put syllables together to form words. And we then learn to put words together to form sentences. And this is what we study in the art of grammar. So I think that's all pretty simple. Make sure you understand the relationship of the parts: letters to syllables, syllables to words, and words to speech or sentences. Now, in our lesson, there's one more or two more rules that I'd like to talk about. This is rules 6 and 7 in the printed lesson. Rules 6 and 7. Now, when we learn about syllables, it's important to understand that a syllable is based on a vowel. So normally, if we look at a word, we can count. This is talking about Latin. This isn't necessarily true in English, but in Latin. If we look at a Latin word, we can count how many vowels are in the word, and that's normally how many syllables are in the word. There's one syllable for every vowel. The vowel is the heart of each syllable, and so we can count the number of vowels in a word, and that's normally the number of syllables. So for example, if we take the word Roma, Roma, in Roma, we have 4 letters. R, O, M, A. R, O, M, A. Roma. If we look at that word, we see that there are 2 vowels, O and A. And because there are 2 vowels, there are 2 syllables. Ro, ma. Ro, ma. 2 vowels, 2 syllables. If we take another word like Maria, Maria, if we look at that word, we'll see that there are 3 vowels, A, E, and A. 3 vowels. There are also 3 syllables in the name Ma, Ri, A. 3 vowels, 3 syllables. This is normal. 1 vowel, 1 syllable. It's very easy to pronounce the Latin words. However, there are certain pairs of vowels. There are certain pairs of vowels. And when we find these special pairs of vowels together, they are not divided into separate syllables. They're spoken together in the same syllable. So there are certain pairs of vowels, and when we find them in a word, they do not divide into separate syllables, but they're spoken together in the same syllable. These special pairs of vowels are called diphthongs. Diphthongs. And in Greek, that word meant 2 sounds, because 2 vowel sounds are spoken in 1 syllable, which is not normal. Diphthongs are special pairs of vowels that are both spoken in the same syllable. As I said, these are special pairs of vowels. So there are only a few of them that need to be learned. Rule number 7 in our first lesson says that the diphthongs are 6 in number. So there are 6 diphthongs in Latin. There are 6 special pairs of vowels which, when we see them together, we do not separate them into separate syllables, but we read them together in 1 syllable. These are the 6 diphthongs in Latin, special pairs of vowels that need to be memorized. Okay? Rule number 7, we read, the diphthongs are 6. And the way that you should learn these diphthongs is by simply naming the vowels in each diphthong. So, for example, the first one is a, e. That's the first diphthong, a, e. The second diphthong is a, u, a, u. The third diphthong is e, 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 e. The fourth diphthong is e, u, e, u. The fifth diphthong is o, e, o, e. And the sixth diphthong is upsilon, e, upsilon, e. These are the 6 and only 6 diphthongs in Latin. These are the 6 special pairs of vowels that are always spoken together in the same syllable. To learn them, you're going to have to memorize them. A, e, a, u, e, u, o, e, upsilon, e. Memorize the names of the vowels in each of the 6 diphthongs. Now, we have to learn the pronunciation of these diphthongs and make sure we pronounce them correctly when we read them. Remember, a diphthong is a pair of vowels that are both spoken in one syllable. So we should make the sounds of each of the vowels when we read the diphthong. So the diphthong a will be read I, I, I. And you can hear the combination of the two sounds, and I, I. The second diphthong, au, is read ow, ow, ow. Hear both sounds. Then we have e, which is read a, a, a. We then have u, which is read eu, eu, eu. We then have e, which is read oi, oi, oi. And lastly, we have upsilon e, which to be perfect is read ui, ui, ui. But to be simpler, especially for English students, you can read it with the sound we, we, we. This is the pronunciation of the 6 Latin diphthongs. So that's a lot of information for the first lesson. That's a lot of information to have to study and learn. It's not difficult information. There's nothing confusing or complicated in this lesson. It just may be a lot of new information. You may need to take some time to practice memorizing the names of the Latin letters and their sounds, and then memorizing the 6 Latin diphthongs and how they're pronounced. That's just going to take some time. But as we go through Latin reading, you're going to see and hear all of these letters and diphthongs pronounced, and it's not going to be a big deal. You're going to get used to them pretty quickly once we get into Latin reading. So study this lesson carefully, listen to this lecture, and try to master all of the content that I've shared in this lecture so far, and you'll quickly pick up classical Latin letters and pronunciation because, like I said, they're very simple. It's very simple. There's just one sound per letter. That's it. It just takes some time to learn the names and those sounds. Now, in this lesson, we're currently around 48 minutes. So I have about 10 minutes left. And what I'd like to do with these last 10 minutes is talk a little bit about ecclesiastical pronunciation. I mentioned before that we were using classical pronunciation. Classical pronunciation is the pronunciation that was used by the ancient Roman people. So the actual Latin of the Romans is called classical Latin. But later in history, after the Christian church was established, Latin was used because, remember, the center of the Christian church was eventually in Rome. The Latin that was used by the Christian people later in history began to change. It didn't sound exactly like the Latin of the ancient Romans. We call this changed Latin ecclesiastical Latin because the word ecclesiastical means that it relates to the church. Ecclesia in Greek means church, and so ecclesiastical means church, church Latin. We also call this Christian Latin. We also call this medieval Latin. But we need to understand that there's a difference between the way that Latin was pronounced by the ancient Romans, classical Latin, and as it was pronounced by Christians in medieval Europe, which is ecclesiastical Latin. If you go to a Catholic church, or even if you go on the internet and just search for Catholic Latin prayers or Catholic Latin hymns, what you'll hear is ecclesiastical pronunciation. You will not hear classical pronunciation. So let's take a few minutes and talk about ecclesiastical pronunciation. There really aren't many differences. There really aren't many differences. The changes that are made in ecclesiastical Latin are made to simply make the language easier to pronounce. It's easier to make the sounds. It's more complicated, but the actual speaking of the language, the actual use of our mouths to speak the language is made easier by ecclesiastical pronunciation, and that's probably used to make the language faster to speak. If you've ever heard Spanish speakers, if you've ever listened to people speaking in Spanish, you'll notice that they speak very quickly. And the reason why they can speak very quickly is that in Spanish, the language is actually changed so that it can be spoken more quickly. Letters are often combined together or slurred together to allow the people to speak more quickly. In English, our speech is kind of clumsy and slow, but we could change it to make it faster. In Spanish, they do that. The same thing happened in Latin. Classical Latin is simple and clear, but it's slow. And in order to make for a faster spoken language, an easier spoken language, changes were made so that the language can be spoken more quickly. And I'll show you what I mean by that. If we look at the Latin alphabet, the first letter that's affected is the letter K, the third letter of the alphabet. When the letter K is spoken in classical Latin, it's always read with the sound k, k, the hard sound in cat, k. In ecclesiastical Latin, this changes. Any time the letter K was used before the sounds E or E, it was changed and pronounced as ch, ch, like cheese or church. Any time the letter K is used before the vowel sounds E or E, the pronunciation is changed to this softer sound, ch, ch. The second letter that's affected by ecclesiastical pronunciation is the letter G, G. In classical Latin, it's pronounced with the hard G sound, G, G. But in ecclesiastical Latin, any time the letter G is followed by the sounds E or E, it's pronounced with a softer sound, the sound J, J. So the letter K and the letter G are softened before the sounds E and E. Instead of saying K, we would say che. Instead of saying ki, we would say chi. Instead of saying ge, we say je. And instead of saying gi, we say ji. The other sounds are the same as in classical. So if we see ka, it's still ka. Ko is still ko, and ku is still ku. Ga is still ga. Go is still go, and gu is still gu. The letters before a, o, and u stay the same, but before e and e, they're softened to ch and j. Those are the first two important sound changes in ecclesiastical Latin. The other sound changes that are important have to do with the diphthongs, and these are very simple. We learned that there are 6 diphthongs in classical Latin, and we have a, au, e, eu, oe, and upsilon-e. In ecclesiastical Latin, there's one simple change to 3 of the diphthongs, or actually two of the diphthongs, sorry. The first diphthong, a, is not read as I, but simply as e. It's shortened and simplified. So in ecclesiastical Latin, the diphthong a is read e. And the same thing is true of the diphthong oe. In ecclesiastical Latin, oe is read as e. So in the diphthong I and oe, the first sound is simply dropped. A is read as e, and oe is read as e. And you can see that makes the language much easier to pronounce and much quicker to pronounce. So 2 changes in the diphthongs and 2 changes in the consonants. We can keep it simple and stop there, and that's really all that you need to know. So in our next hour, we're going to begin Latin reading. And when we begin Latin reading, because we're going to be reading the Gospel of John, which is Christian writing, we're going to read it with ecclesiastical pronunciation. And so when you've learned the simple pronunciation of classical Latin at the beginning of this lesson, and you hear the reading of the Gospel of John in Latin in our first reading lesson, you're going to notice that it sounds different. And the reason why it's different is because of these changes in ecclesiastical Latin. I hope that that's clear. I want to keep it simple on purpose because we're going to talk about it more in our lesson on reading, which is our next hour. For this first hour, what's important for you to learn is the Latin alphabet, the names of the 23 Latin letters, how those letters divide into 2 classes, vowels and consonants, which Latin letters are vowels, which Latin letters are consonants. Memorize the 6 Latin diphthongs and understand the relationship between letters, syllables, words, and sentences. And then, after you've studied all of that, practice a little bit with ecclesiastical pronunciation, and you'll have made an excellent study of this first hour in freshman Latin. As I said, in our next lesson, we're going to begin Latin reading, and we'll talk more about pronunciation, start learning Latin vocabulary, and begin reading real Latin right from the beginning in our second lesson in freshman Latin. I hope that's been helpful. If you have any questions, please contact me. Now it's time for you to study this lesson, complete your lesson assessment, and continue working with me through freshman Latin. God bless your studies.